Hey everybody, this is Jacob Stoops and we are back again for episode 64 of the Page 2 podcast. If you don't know me, I'm an SEO director at Search Discovery, a data transformation company. And I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jeff Luella, Senior Technical SEO at the Wirecutter, a division of the New York Times. Jeff, how's it going?
Hey, howdy, hey. Things are going good.
Jeff, you were
Sunny.
really early. You were really
It's
early on that.
I know it's a good day. It's sunny out. It's kind of warm. I'm about to go out after this and take a decent walk. I know the Northeast got hit. It's a lot of snow. So
Yeah, it's a
uh
lot different there than here, man. It's
yeah, we're
it's
pushing
it's snowing
60.
right now.
Ooh, yeah, it's pushing 60 down here in Georgia. So
Yeah, that's
enjoy it. The reason I made the move.
that's good sunbathing weather. Yeah, we can't do that up here. It is snow and ice. We got slammed with a snowstorm last weekend, and we're gonna get hit with another snowstorm this weekend. My kids were out of school for a couple of days this week, so that's typical Ohio, northern United States, northeast United States weather. But it doesn't bother me. We just, I don't mind the seasons. I don't mind when it snows. It bothers other people, not necessarily me. So one other thing worth noting for our listeners is we have actually passed the threshold of being halfway through the season. We actually went through the halfway point last season. So Jeff, I think one of the things I wanted to ask you is what do you feel like we've learned, or what have been kind of your favorite parts of the season thus far?
Great question.
Put him
me on
right
the
on
spot.
the right
yeah,
on the spot.
Putting me on the spot. It's the same as probably every season. It's just the mixture of talented people in this space and how they got into it and just meeting and like learning about people, because you only get so much out of Twitter, but an hour and a half conversation totally gets so much more out of them than just learning about their tweets. So and this season's, I think, been, not to put down past guests, but this season's been pretty good, so I've been enjoying it.
Yeah, this season has been good, and I will say last episode obviously was super heavy because we certainly went pretty deep and were, in my opinion, pretty raw with our emotions as it relates to the passing of previous season 3 guest Hamlet Batista. And I do want to quickly say his GoFundMe has been going really, really, really well. Lily Ray organized it, and she's been kind of at the forefront as one of his closer friends. It is at $60,000 out of a $100,000 goal. That being said, this is obviously his family's time of need. I cannot imagine what they might be going through now. So if you do have the means, please go over there and donate. It's an easy Google search. You can search GoFundMe Hamlet Batista and it will show up, or you can go to gofundme.com/F/in-memory- of Hamlet Batista to donate. So right now it's at $60,000. The goal is $100,000. Let's help his family out. It is their time of need, and that was a very sad and unfortunate event. And what I will say is, I think this season more than most other seasons, like we have a bunch. We've got 2 other seasons, but we've had, we're 60 episodes deep into this podcast. It's been a rewarding season. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, obviously, because of what happened. There have been, in my opinion, especially last episode, like that was as raw as it gets in terms of our reaction and really feeling the sadness of Hamlet's passing. But then, as we think of the rest of this season, especially even last episode, Jason Barnard was the perfect guest. And it's just one of those situations where didn't intend it to be that way, but his perspective as a guest, he came in and he just brought kind of like a ray of light to the episode. Like, I don't know how he did it, because he was pretty sad too. And the positivity that he brought to the middle of what was amazingly difficult episode. And we almost didn't record it. Like Jeff and I were talking before the episode, like, should we just not record this week? Should we just skip and reschedule? And we finally decided, no, let's push through, let's record, and let's talk about it. And then Jason, I mean, he sang in the middle of the episode. It was friggin' fantastic.
I think he loves to sing. So
yeah, well, good for him. I love to sing too. And I've never sang in the middle of an episode. And Jason, man, if you're listening, I just want to thank you. Like, you were like a ray of light, because, we were both pretty down. And, just having you tell your story, and, how you went from creating an internationally syndicated children's cartoon and being kind of the cartoon characters to an SEO career was amazing. And all the other guests this season, with their unique stories and unique perspectives, right? That's why we got into this game, into the podcasting game, because we wanted to kind of get behind the scenes and talk about what it was really like to be, what it is really like to be an SEO, kind of the stuff that you would hear if you were a fly on the wall with two SEOs talking to each other, as opposed to maybe an SEO talking to their client and what they might say, kind of just the behind the scenes sort of stuff. And we've, that's been something that I've enjoyed capturing. I've also enjoyed all the Twitter questions, and each passing week we've been getting more and more, and it's been really cool. So that is, I think, something that may be around to stay kind of longer term. Last season we tried the news, that didn't work out so well. This season, the Twitter questions, I enjoy awarding merchandise and getting that out there in the world. But yeah, no, it's been a good season so far, and we've got a lot of good stuff really in store for the rest of the season. And this season will go to episode 75, so 25 episodes per season. And then next season it will be 76 through 100.
We're almost podcast senior citizens.
Yeah, we've been. I mean, in the podcast world, what are we, like 75? Everybody's got their own podcast now. So, I mean, having started this 2 years ago, gosh, we're like OGs in the podcast world, I guess, at least for SEO. Not necessarily like the first SEO podcast, but we've been around a long time. Yes.
We are page 2.
Yeah. And also we discovered that apparently there is another digital marketing podcast out there called the Page 1 podcast. What the fuck, man? So I picked the worst name possible. So when I picked Page 2 podcast way back in the day, there was no Page 2 podcast. It didn't exist. And then I come to find out, and as an SEO, I'm stupid for not doing this. I did not buy the domain page2podcast.com. And guess what came along 6 months later? A freaking church created their version of the Page 2 podcast. And when I reached out to them and said, hey, I've kind of got dibs, they were like, yeah, we're not giving you the domain, and good luck with your show. You can move on now. So I've moved on. I've been watching their domain, but for whatever reason, I don't know why I even stumbled upon this, but just the other day I found the Page 1 podcast, and it's a digital marketing podcast. And I just want to like cover my head. Like, maybe we should rebrand. I don't even know what to do at this point. But apparently, there will probably be a Page 3 podcast, a Page 4 podcast, Page 5. So it's an unfortunate name, and I'm kicking myself.
It's still a good name.
Yeah, it's a good name. So fuck you, all other Page 2 and Page 1 podcasts. Go to hell. All right.
Except the church people.
We've got a guest. He has been patiently waiting in the background. And today's guest is Mr. Paul Shapiro, Global Director of Technical SEO at Condé Nast. Paul, welcome to the show. Yeah, it's going great.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening to our on the spot kind of opinions about the status of this season so far, as well as my rant about all the other Page 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 5 podcasts out there.
That wasn't in the show notes.
No, it was not. It was just one of those unanticipated things that just came to my mind, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna rant about this. This is ridiculous.
That's
Cool, man.
it's frustrating. Domain names.
Right, domain names. I'm an SEO. You think I would know better? You think I would know better? Anyway, so before we tell Paul's origin story, one of the things we've been doing, it's very near and dear to our heart, and it's also very near and dear to Paul's heart because Paul's conference is very much in sync with the organization United Search. So we've been doing a live read. We want to promote this diversity, balance, and inclusion. Really, really, really important to us. And it's definitely something that's been at the core of our podcast ever since the beginning. So for all those people looking to break into the SEO conference speaking circuit. So if you're looking to break into the conference speaking circuit, but you're not sure how, if you're feeling that you are not well represented within the current SEO speaking circuit and you want to change that, but again, you're not sure how, we at the Page 2 podcast would like to take the opportunity to let you know about United Search, a new organization and first of its kind SEO speaker accelerator dedicated to ending the implicit bias in SEO that keeps BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and women in the margins of our industry. Their credo is diverse SEO equals better SEO. United Search offers mentoring advice from people with real-world practical SEO experiences in order to give students the skills they need to be able to deliver an amazing presentation on any stage and the network they need to land gigs, all at no cost to the student. How does this work? Well, it's actually pretty simple. United Search connects a cohort of the best pitches they can source with the top mentors in their subject matter. After working with their mentors to develop their talk, they will host a live stream event where students get to present SEO experts and receive positive, constructive feedback. Graduates of this SEO accelerator will get the benefit of top-notch mentorship, public speaking training, a video reel, lots of positive feedback, as well as a foot in the door to help find and land speaking gigs and access to an amazing community of SEO professionals. So what does this mean for our podcast? As a sponsor and advocate, we're committed to regularly showing stats that illustrate our commitment to diversity on this podcast, and we've made a pledge to diversify, meaning that 60% of our guests will come from underrepresented groups, including women, BIPOC, BAME, LGBTQIA+, as well as representation for people with disabilities and those who are 55+ and older. If this sounds of interest to you, visit unitedsearch.org to learn more about becoming a student or mentor, or visit them at Twitter. At United, I'm sorry, I'm completely destroying this, on Twitter at @search_United. And I think my radio contract is getting ripped up as we speak. Jeff, what do you think?
It's all right.
That was my worst live read by far.
You have been stepping back. It's all right.
I said mentor, and then mentor. I said it two different ways throughout that. And then I always get tripped up with the word underrepresented literally every single time. Maybe I should just rewrite the live read and make it a lot shorter so I don't make an ass of myself.
Here, if you do that, they actually remove iTunes reviews.
Oh, really? If I do what? No live reads, or?
Oh, if you mess up during a live read.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. All right. Well, maybe I can just if I keep doing that, I don't get iTunes reviews. Is that what you're saying?
They take them away. They take them away. Lose the stars.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
We
Well,
now have one.
I did check our stars, and we do still have some stars on iTunes, but I need to get my game up to par so that they don't take all of our stars away.
Yeah, and that just reminds us, if you're listening, rate us.
Yes.
Like us, subscribe, because that definitely helps with our rankings inside of the podcast stores or YouTube or wherever you're hearing this at.
Yes, we do an awful job of promoting ourselves right at the beginning of our podcast. So I will say we do have a YouTube channel. So as the kids say, if you like our content, please subscribe, hit the little bell below to be notified when we launch a new video. We've been launching new videos, video content weekly. If you listen to us from your podcast platform, specifically Apple is the one that offers the most ability to write reviews. Please go write a review, rate us. It does help our rankings. And as people that care about rankings, we care about our rankings within podcast platforms. So cool. All right, well, let's jump into the episode. So Paul, for those that don't know you, out there within our listener base, who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So name's Paul Shapiro. I've been working in SEO, I think about 10 years. I don't think I've actually formally counted how long I've been working in SEO. I'm currently the global director of technical SEO for Condé Nast. So for those that aren't familiar with Condé Nast, it's an organization that owns a bunch of magazines and other publications online. Just to rattle off a few: Wired.com, Vogue, GQ, New Yorker, Bon Appetit, a bunch of big names in publishing. I've been in this role, I think, about 8 months at this point, and I had just come from a long stand at an agency, so the whole in-house thing is kind of new to me. But so far, I'm really enjoying it. So other things about me: I founded an online, it's not an online, an in-person conference called Tech SEO Boost. It's a conference dedicated explicitly for technical SEO. And we've done it for 3 or 4 years now. My misspeaking comes from the fact that we are currently planning an online version of Tech SEO Boost during the pandemic. So more details about that to follow. You can also find me around the internet. I have a blog that I haven't updated in a few years, searchwilderness.com, and I'm pretty active on Twitter as Fighto, Fighto.
I have to ask, I've always wondered what's with your Twitter handle. How did you create, do you get into like street fights or is that something else?
Yeah. It is a fragment of an old AOL username that I just never steered away from, and I kept rocking it. It's very short, and I kept with it. And people ask me that all the time. It's not a fun answer, but it harkens back to like some middle school days for sure.
Yeah, the funny thing is, so before we got on to last week's episode, I found one of Jason's comments to Jeff and I really, really hilarious and I've never, ever heard this in my life. He said, "Jacob, I really like your name," which nobody has ever said to me because my name is so damn boring. Same with Jeff. "Jeff, I like your name too." And I would say, and I just want to carry Jason's commentary forward. I like your handle. It's pretty, it's pretty hip. It's not boring. And I will say, for a long time, I've been wondering the origins. So it does sound like the origin story is maybe a little more boring than I had hoped for.
Yeah, apologies, but kept rolling with it. Kept it really professional with my middle school AOL name.
It could have been worse.
Yeah. Well, speaking of middle school AOL names, I'm gonna be a little bit vulnerable here. So, and this is actually really, really, really funny. And God forgive me for anybody that is offended by this. This was just a middle school and high school boy being a high school boy, and it wasn't actually me. So back in the days of AOL, I had not yet gotten on to Yahoo Instant Messenger, and my best friend at the time said, "Dude, you need to get on Instant Messenger so we can talk." And I said, "Sure. Why don't you go ahead and create me an account?" Do you want to know what my username was?
I do. I want to know. I don't want to.
Delicious Dog 29.
Ooh.
So brutally awful. And believe me, as a teenage boy, I was like, that's awesome. And then I went and got myself a Yahoo email that was Delicious Dog. And then the first time, I think I used that initially to buy a domain from GoDaddy or something like that. And I had some tech support trouble. And one of the first questions at that time was, "Can you tell me your email?" And I was sweating, no, I can't do this. And I had to say, Delicious Dog 29. And it was at that moment I realized, okay, this is a little unprofessional. And that was it. Like, I think I was like 19 or 20 at that time. So long time ago, super, super embarrassing name. And I'm so glad that I did not take my high school AOL name and try to like steer it forward into my future personal brand, because that would have been really, really bad.
Man, I don't remember if I had one, because in the early days of the internet, I enjoyed going through flame wars and all the anonymous things. So I probably had 30 accounts. Until one day I was like, I'm just going to use my name on everything. It
Yeah.
prevents me from, like, if I'm going to fight, I put my name behind that fight instead of just fighting for no reason.
Yeah.
And, because sometimes that was fun to do too. In the middle of the night, just be like, totally take the opposite approach and be a troll. So using your real name has taken me away from troll status. Luckily, been using it for about 15 years now. The negative part of that is now my name is attached to so much spam that it's like, oh, I got to change my real name to something else because I'm constantly unsubscribed. I think I unsubscribe from 10 emails, 20 emails a day,
Mm-hmm.
and like 30 more show up from it. So
yeah. So Paul, take us back to the beginning. How did you get started into SEO?
Yeah, you want an equally unimpressive origin story? I'll give it to you. All right, I joke a little. Yeah, so I was in college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do going out of college. And I think it was somewhere towards the end of my junior or senior year. I was like, I want to do marketing. And this whole like social media thing sounds pretty cool. I want to do social media marketing. And I graduated out of college, could not get a job in social media marketing for the life of me. I had had reached out to a few conferences in social media marketing that were happening at the time, and was like, I'm a poor student, can I attend your conference? I'll volunteer, help you guys out. And I did that. Still, I had tons of connections. By the time I graduated, couldn't get a job. The economy wasn't in the best place at that time. It probably had something to do with it. But I decided to apply for, actually, my wife, who was my girlfriend at that time, told me, why don't you apply for this job? It's this thing called SEO. And I'm like, oh, I know about SEO. It's this whole thing where you like write a keyword a million times into the HTML, and like it helps you appear on Google. And I was like, I'm not interested in that. I want to do like real marketing, like social media marketing. And I applied, and that was the one job I got. And that was at an agency called Acronym in New York City. And I started as an intern. And then I got hired full time, and I learned the whole thing about SEO. Turned out I was really good at it, I thought I was pretty good at it, and then I kept with it. So I got into SEO right after college, knowing nothing about it, and I just sort of kept with it. One of the things why I think I got hired and why it made a lot of sense was that some people in high school, they'll work a retail job or something like that. I was building websites freelance, so I was really into like the web design and web development sort of side of things. Throughout high school, I started building my first website in middle school, where I got that terrible username that I use on Twitter. So I'd been doing web stuff for years. So it sort of made sense. I was interested in marketing. I was interested in web design, web development. SEO really made a lot of sense. I just didn't know it. And part of the problem was when I was doing all this web design, probably what was the early days of SEO, I didn't know anything about SEO. I didn't know it existed. I was making tons of websites that didn't rank for anything. I'm sure I never even paid attention to that. I was like many other people, just focused on making like flashy, pretty websites. And then I was selling them and building them for people, and then I never even focused on the other end. And I'm sad about that. Sort of, you hear a lot of SEO stories where like, oh, I was making websites for my client, and then they cared about business, and then so I started doing this SEO thing. I never got to that point, so I'm a little bit bummed about that. But that's my SEO origin story. I worked in SEO the second I got out of college, knew nothing about it. and it ended up being a really good fit.
Yeah, that is actually eerily similar to my origin story. Now mine has some twists and turns that involve working at a pet store and working at Staples and UPS and just these horrible jobs that finally led me into being a self-taught web designer. But the same thing, it was building a bunch of websites. They're not getting traffic. Oh, people actually want business. Oh, so maybe I need to look at marketing. And that's when I kind of fell into SEO almost accidentally, right? I didn't know what SEO was. I didn't intend to fall into SEO. And we talk about this all the time, which is why the origin stories are so interesting. Is nobody means, at least back at that point in time, rarely do people mean to get into SEO. It might be a little different today, but I suspect it's fairly similar. People don't know that they're looking for SEO, and SEO has a way of finding you.
Definitely.
So when did you kind of catch the passion, right? Because at some point something clicked for you, right? When did you kind of catch the passion for SEO and realize, hey, I can do this?
Yeah, well, I think when I started at that job, I was just performing really well. I was doing things at a very fast clip and efficiently and doing it well. And part of the reason for that was I didn't even talk about this. So like in college, I majored in psychology and religion, which isn't listed on my LinkedIn. And I was super interested in the psychology of religion. And in fact, when I started that double major, my intention was I'm going to get a PhD and do research on the psychology of religion. And what that led me to was I worked in a lot of labs doing psychology research. And in those labs, I started getting heavy into data analysis and automating some of those systems that the professors that I was working with were using for crunching that data. So like I remember I had one professor that was, we were doing everything in SPSS at the time, but there was this whole rigmarole for preparing the data. And I was like, this is incredibly cumbersome. I don't want to, be doing all this manual work. And at that time, I think, the hot thing was like Ruby on Rails. So I was toying around with like Ruby at the time. So I wrote this system for data preparation in Ruby in college. And this has sort of been the story of my life going back way back. And when I started my first SEO job, we had similar challenges. So I started building like little systems for working with data, automating reporting, and that allowed me to be more efficient with my work. So if I had to, I was just a junior SEO, I was writing title tags, but when I had to take time to do other things, I alleviated that with like automation and everything just sort of like made sense. Like I was doing the right things at the right time, and I didn't know it until I started doing it.
And then at what point did you go from Acronym? Like, how long did you stay at Acronym? Did you move on to other agencies?
Yeah, so it was a relatively short stint at Acronym. I got my next job. I would say I attribute my next job to Twitter. I went into the SEO industry and I was immediately like, all the SEOs are on Twitter. Let me start talking on Twitter. And I had my Twitter account since, I don't know, probably like my sophomore year of college, and Twitter was still sort of new then. So I had a Twitter account, and I just hadn't used it. But at that point, I started using it a lot, and uh, was participating in Twitter chats, which were like really hot then. People still do those,
Mm-hmm.
not as much as they used to, I think. And then someone reached out to me with a job opportunity, and that was at Catalyst in New York. And I went up another level joining Catalyst, and which is, if for those that aren't familiar with Catalyst, it's one of the SEO and paid search and now social arms of Group M. And at the time, it was really the only arm. It would be people from Catalyst would be, in the US at least, would be doing SEO for all the different Group M agencies like Mindshare and Mediacom. That's since changed. And then I stayed a long time at Catalyst. I just moved on from a role at Catalyst where I had, you know, multiple roles over the years. So at one point I was just like an SEO director, managing some junior SEOs and running SEO accounts. And then I was the director of, I can't even remember, it was innovation strategy and innovation, something along the lines of that. It was this weird role that was situated in our data science department that was focused on, I would say, really like novel ways of using data, building applications for both SEO and paid search, working with a very lean team of engineers and data scientists, and you know, doing interesting things. And then from there, I moved on, leading SEO for all of Catalyst. And you know, I think I did 8 or 9 years there. From which point I was like, I really want to do the in-house thing, and I moved on to Condé Nast when John Shahada, who I work with, reached out with the role, and I was like, yes, this is awesome. I'm in.
What you know, now that you've been in the in-house role for at least a little bit of time, what have you seen to be the biggest differences, both, you know, pros and cons?
Yeah, Condé isn't, I think, from my experience of just one company, I think is probably a unique setup in terms of an in-house team. It, just because there's so many brands, it has this weird of hybrid feeling of an agency and an in-house team. Like we have a bunch of SEO managers that are, you know, dedicated to like 1 or 2 or 3 brands, very similar to you have an agency structure. The differences there, and especially because I'm focusing on the technical and global side of things, and I work primarily with like product managers and engineers. We have a unified CMS system for the most part, and I'm looking at more like institutional changes, things on the CMS that are, you know, affecting things across the board. So on that side of things, it's not at all like an agency, right? Because like I'm changing actual systems within the Condé Nast brands. But on the other end, I'm working with, you know, the rest of our SEO team, which operates very similar to an agency. It's pretty cool. I like it. So my whole role is very different than the agency thing, and I like that very much. It's very nice to be able to make changes in your CMS and, like, you know, work directly with product and engineering, and that's not something that you always have when you're on the agency side. Sometimes you can get buy-in and work closely with those people, but it's not the same. It's very different.
Yeah, I've been at agency for most of my career, but there have been a few times I've been in-house, and it is nice to be able to walk over to the developer and lean over their shoulder and say, can you do this, this, and this, and have it done and committed to the code and deployed, you know, within that 24-hour period. Whereas at an agency, it's you make the recommendation and then hurry up and wait.
Yeah, and
in some cases for years.
I have Git access. Like I can deploy code. That
Oh my
is
God.
such a good feeling.
Yeah, that
Such a
would be
good feeling.
amazing. So I would say we want to move into the next section here soon, but I have a couple more questions. The next section you're going to want to listen to because we're going to talk about the rise of technical SEO. We're going to dive deep into that. But I would say 2 questions. So tell us your best SEO story from your career. Could be crazy, funny, whatever the case may be.
This is not something that happened with a client per se. So
Okay.
when you get into the world of being senior leadership within an SEO agency, you're inevitably going to be pulled into sales pitches.
Mhm.
And I was pulled into a sales pitch. I can't even remember who the company was at this point, but we're in the middle of this big presentation, and they have like C-suite members in the boardroom, and all of a sudden a like a projection screen drops down, and in the middle of this sales pitch where we're getting like into like very nitty gritty SEO, Ricky Martin video starts playing, blasting, and no one can figure out how this happened, how to stop it. It went on for quite some time, and it is quite possibly my funniest moment in my SEO career. I know that's not necessarily what we were getting at, but it's just so funny.
That's pretty. I did not expect Ricky Martin to enter this podcast discussion at all today.
Nor did I when that happened.
It's funny. I had similar things, but I know exactly how it happened. My first internet job, I was kind of just building websites. We were a Sun Microsystem reseller, so everyone had like a Sun server on their desk. They wanted me to use Photoshop off of a Sun server back then. I'm like, no, you need to get me like a Windows computer or something for this. But doing all our coding, I had to jump into VI into Unix and code my HTML that way. But the owner was a little crazy at times, and he was the type that like didn't show up on Fridays on paydays and like would leave you hints of where your paychecks were. But he also had like a temper, and he would just come and like yell at you for some reason. And as he's yelling at me, the sysop in like the back room like sees it happening and like takes over my server and just starts like blasting all different types of like music and popping up videos on my machine. He's like, "What are you doing over here?" He's like yelling at me about this. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on, but I knew it was the one guy. So it was hard to get disciplined when you have like cartoons popping up on your server in front of you. So it would have been crazier with the client and with Ricky Martin. I think those are different variables that are.
It was so perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
I've never have I ever had Ricky Martin show up on a client pitch.
Your loss.
Right, that is my loss. I wish that had happened. That'd be too funny. So last question before we move into the core topic. So of course I have to ask, you have is it twin girls?
I have twins, a boy and a girl.
Oh, boy and a girl. So for those parents and non-parents out there, I guess just tell us what that's like and what that's been like during the pandemic.
It is the absolute hardest thing I've ever had to endure. I've only ever had to it once, but I would imagine it is significantly more difficult than just having one child, just based on anecdotes I've heard from others.
Yes.
It is, everything's a logistical nightmare when you have twins, right? You can't pick one, you have to pick two up at once. You have to do various things all at the same time. One twin, starts crying, the other one starts crying. It's like there's never enough hands. It's always challenging. I think they're almost 2 now, and things have started to get a little bit easier. But of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there's all sorts of challenges there. But it is crazy, man. Like it is really, really hard. And they're so awesome, but it's impossible. And they don't sleep through the night still. I think that was probably like a parenting mishap, but I haven't slept in I haven't slept in 2 years.
Yeah, I have boy girl twins, and they're 10 now, so it does get better. They're each other's best friends. It was actually hard to separate them at times, but at the same time they're crazy right now. They make me laugh because they both like, again, they have each other. They're like battling each other in Minecraft. They're battling like all the different things there, but they do have different schedules. Like one is a night owl and one is an early bird. Like my son has trouble staying up past like 9, while my daughter at like midnight, I find her in her room just like drawing. And she's like, and it was this way since they were like in the womb, almost. Like the one, my wife could always say like, oh, like she could feel our like overactive daughter like all the time in her belly. And then when she was born, like she was always that way, always at night kicking and screaming. So we were always helping her, while my son always slept great. Like he sleeps now in 2 seconds, puts his arms behind his head and just passes out.
Yeah.
Which probably won't be good in college when he's like at a party, because he's just going to pass out and probably wake up with a Sharpie mustache. But but my daughter's she's the twins are great. They like the way they interact with each other. They do get their own language. They don't have to talk. They can just look at each other and either start a fight or start laughing at one or the other. So it does get better, and it is definitely entertaining.
Yeah, for sure. Mine are totally different from one another, and
Yeah.
it blows my mind. It wasn't until I had twins. Like I always thought, like the whole nature nurture discussion, that there was way more nurture than I now think. Like I think there's like definitely like a genetic element of it that
Mhm.
is much heavier weighted than I previously thought, and it's just mind blowing.
Yeah, I don't know. I know a little bit about what it's like and a little bit about not what it's like. And the reason I say that, I've got three. I've got a 7, a 5, and a 1-year-old. So mine are all spaced out, right? So with the no sleep, I totally feel that. For the first two, we got no sleep for a long time, and then our third was a good sleeper. So like as a parent of young ones, like you just don't sleep, and eventually, like it sucks. Eventually you learn how to function on less sleep. And then that just becomes the norm. But I will say my wife, triplet. My wife is a triplet with two brothers. So when we talk to them about like, hey, what was your experience being a triplet? They're like, well, we didn't have any other siblings. So like, we don't know anything else. And I can attest they're all really, really, really different. So I do believe in, yeah, there is a certain like genetic thing, like they have completely different personalities. But of course they, when they were young, of course they all hung out together and they were like best friends and so on and so forth. But like as they've gotten older, their personalities are so different. Like they couldn't be any more different. It's just it's crazy. And we talked to their to my in-laws, and it's exactly what you had said, the logistical nightmare. They were like, we didn't go out to dinner for like 10 years because you don't want to take three at the same age. And as I think of being a parent now with different ages, you get different behaviors, different levels of maturity. My 7-year-old can kind of handle himself, whereas we can spend time with the 1-year-old. And good God, I couldn't imagine having two versions of my 1-year-old or three, all of the same age at the same time. My mother-in-law, as she looks back on it, says like, and I don't think she's kidding. She's like, I really do not remember anything from your first 2 years, because it was just a blur.
Totally.
Crazy. So Jeff, you want to move into the
Sure.
rise of technical SEO?
Yeah. So as a technical SEO, I find it interesting. I used to feel when I first got into SEO, I worked at a company called Razorfish, and I was doing web development, and I was lured over to the SEO team. And part of the luring me over to the SEO team was, one, I focused a lot on accessibility in my dev work, which translated great into SEO. And part of my deal was like, I don't want to write title tags, because I like, as a dev, I had to like implement tons of title tags, because this was like somewhat before CMSs were everywhere. So we had tons of just HTML pages, and it was just a pain. And I was considered what they called an SEO engineer at the time, which was kind of like the original of like technical SEO at that. Like I really was lucky. I was pulled into it. I had the guy who led the SEO team was kind of visionary in seeing the way SEO was being split. And they had, out of the 30 SEOs they had, like no one really understood the technical side of it, because they were like, SEO was always content. So I feel like over the last like 4 years, like the term technical SEO, it's like, it seems like that's what everyone wants to be. Right. Everyone wants to be a technical SEO. Okay, can you teach me everything about technical SEO? And I'm like, do you even have a website? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, do that and then come back. It's like things like that. But so I feel, and I like, one reason I wanted to bring this topic up is because I feel like technical SEO has been really growing. And maybe it's because not saying like content is going anywhere or went anywhere. Maybe it's like content has plateaued and technical has come up, but it's kind of like, I guess I just want to pick your brain is like, what are some of the reasons you feel like technical SEO has really blown up over the last, I'll say 5 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. So by the time I had gotten into SEO, like, SEO was an old thing. Like it had been around
Mm-hmm.
a while. Jeff, you probably saw more of this than I did, I think, just given like your resume,
I'm
but
old.
you're not old, you're young. But we I had been told by a lot of people that there was sort of like different iterations of SEO over time, where like SEO from the very beginning was just very technical in nature because it was, the Wild West of the World Wide Web, and people were figuring things out and experimenting and trying to, shove a bunch of like spam on the web so that they can rank and do really well. And then as Google evolved, it got better at understanding things. People got slaps from penalties, and there was a reformation where people started being like, oh, it's content marketing and we want to like care about the user and do things really nice and make sure that there's a query is answering a question, like. And that was sort of like when I had gotten into SEO, that people were, I think it was just shortly after Penguin came out. And so like the SEO I knew was all like very, very clean, white hat, content marketing focused. And that's how I got into SEO when SEO was in that stage. So I don't know what happened prior to that. Um, at the same time, like I thought that was interesting and cool, but I kept finding like different ways of like playing with things. And I think um, although there wasn't as much of an emphasis in the industry, there was still some people like dabbling in like more like technical applications of SEO. Um, and then I think as the years sort of progressed, the web just kept getting more and more complex, right? Like, and people had to adjust to that. Like every website is using JavaScript, right? Um, how do we handle that? Google's not really great at reading JavaScript. Now Google's really good at reading JavaScript. Um, there is just like new web technologies. There used to be Flash, used to be a thing. Flash is no longer a thing. And it's just like the web has changed so much, so drastically in a short period of time. Google's gotten better at understanding things. Their ability to do information retrieval and understand what's on the web has just improved every single year. So the whole SEO thing has gotten more complicated. Even if you're doing great content marketing, there's no guarantee that you're going to
Yeah.
rank. It takes it, and especially in an organization where they've been doing SEO for years and they got the basics down, and um, it, it depends on the business, but there's times when you're working on a website where like what else is there to do, right? Like you've got
Yeah.
you've got great content, you've got this sophisticated ecosystem, and yeah, like you need to maintain that, but you're doing really well, right? And how do you push the envelope there? And
Yeah.
usually the answer in that case is something technical.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's funny. Back when I worked at Razorfish, the SEO team was its own. It ran global SEO for all the different Razorfish offices. It was all out of Philadelphia, and we had our own dev team that built tools for us because back then we didn't have like 50,000 ranking tools to choose from. We didn't have like all these different things available. So we had like 2 or 3 devs that were just there to help build tools. And I remember there's 2 things that they built that really stood out for the time. And one was what they called SOFA, which was search optimized Flash architecture, because everyone was building Flash. So it was kind of just like, hey, if like it was all done kind of pulling JavaScript in Flash, and Google would get the HTML version of it. It was back then that was kind of like revolutionary. Now, like, I mean, there's no Flash, but that's kind of graceful degradation of sites. And the other was they built a ranking tool and like a crawler that, Google was getting smart, and they realized if you're running 10,000 rankings from your one IP, they would ban. Our office got banned like every day, things like that. So they developed a screensaver because the SETI organization that's looking for extraterrestrial life forms had a screensaver that if everyone installed on their computers when your computer wasn't in use, it would use your power to do that. So they took that idea and had everybody at Razorfish installed on their home computers. So when you're at work and you leave your home computer on, we could use your home computer for search rankings. It was an interesting time. That was kind of before you can get like 10,000 proxies for $5. We kind of built our own internal proxy network built off of that. And thinking back now, I'm like, that was such genius ideas back then for doing stuff. So, but they weren't really considered the SEO team. They were our like tool team for search. But to me, like I sat in that office all the time just kicking ideas because it was like, this is the cool stuff that I love doing. Like, if that was still around, they might still have a team like that, but they would probably be leading all the like, machine learning type of things and, stuff that's going on now. But back then it was pretty interesting. So like now that technical SEO, and I guess before it was just like you were an SEO and now like we are breaking apart, like, we had link builders and then we had SEOs. Now there's like, content and technical and things like that. But what are some of the skills that you think that make great technical SEOs?
Yeah. I think that differentiation is probably because there's a lot to specialize in, right? Like you can go very deep down the rabbit hole into each one of those, and the skill sets are kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's this discussion of like the T-shaped marketer, but it's becoming harder and harder to be that T-shaped marketer nowadays. But in terms of skills, right? You see a lot of like push and pull about this, like in like Twitter conversations, but I really do think programming experience is extremely valuable when it comes to technical SEO for a myriad of reasons. One, when you're working on a website, being able to better interface with a product and development team, speak the same language, understand what is possible, what isn't possible, that at the very simplest level is a use case for being familiar with that. Two, being able to iterate and experiment and try new things very rapidly. That's only made possible usually by being able to write code. And you could totally do regular technical SEO without any coding experience, but I think you get a leg up when you can very much on an ad hoc basis, right? Like a very little, like quick script that takes care of something. It just makes you faster than the other guy, right?
Yeah.
Especially because like you can work with an engineering team, but a lot of times like engineering teams are bogged down with like tech debt. They're very focused on like process and making sure that if this is in a production environment, that it's not going to break, that it works well with their other systems, and sometimes you want to move a little bit faster. Like you want to move fast, break things, right? And it allows you to that skill allows you to do that. Three, and this is getting into the Python stuff. Python has just been such a dynamic programming language when it comes to data exploration, and being like a data oriented marketer. It's extremely useful. You're able to do and unlock way more insights if you have some Python or experience just on the data end. So yeah, I think no, you do not need to know how to program to be a really good technical SEO to some extent, but it's definitely going to give you a leg up if you know. Other skills, very much like sometimes of business roles or engineering roles. I think just a problem solving mindset, being able to break apart problems into their bare components, and address them accordingly is useful, because usually you're working in complex ecosystems with a lot of moving parts, and there's not only like a business side of things, but there's like the mechanics of a website that there's a database you might have to work with. There's some maybe like a front end JavaScript framework. There's HTML, CSS. There's how everything is linked together. You get into very complex systems, and being able to problem solve pretty well is very important. Now that's hard to learn, but it is a good skill. And three, and I think this is true of not just technical SEO, this is also true of SEO in general, but just being very curious, a desire to like learn about new things, play around, experiment. What if I tweak X? How does that affect Y? Um, the best SEOs, in my opinion, are those that are curious.
Yeah.
I would say lately I've also been thinking a lot about my own mentality, and being on the agency side. Implementation is sometimes really, really, really difficult and frustrating. But from a mentality standpoint, I've been thinking more and more like I need to be, or at least a modern SEO needs to be more scientific and less, this is the framework, these are the best practices, and they're always going to work, because more and more I'm seeing that that's not always the case with every single client in every single vertical. And people are becoming, organizations are becoming data savvy and data centric. And if you're an SEO that is not focusing almost like a scientist or a doctor, where you test the outcomes of different things and you learn what works and what doesn't, I feel like you're at risk of, to some degree, being left behind if you're just always relying on best practices or the framework of what's supposed to be a good SEO practice blindly. So, Paul, one question I have to ask is, as we get into kind of this modern era of SEO, what are kind of your favorite things to dabble with on the technical side?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do like experimentation, just the nature of experimentation. It's not an easy thing to do by any means within SEO, but with some diligence and hard work, and maybe some smart data scientists, like it is possible, and it yields results. And even if you're not doing a formal like science experiment, having that mentality of experimentation, I think is great, and I enjoy that. Um, some more concrete things, I would say, I love playing around. I've mentioned this already. I love playing around with just data, being able to pull apart the data and apply it in unique ways. Tool development, in terms of playing with things on the website, how things are interlinked together, playing with things like um, internal linking, um, page rank, sort of like network graph type things, um, NLP analysis of content. I'm not quite as sophisticated on like the text generation stuff as some of the SEOs are, but in terms of like text analysis, like I love that.
Yeah.
Which ties in very heavily with like keyword research and whatnot. The actual like site architecture design, which is, I think, a lot more complex than people usually talk about it within SEO. Like in SEO, people usually talk about it like, how is your navigation structured and how are things like linked? But it's really much more than that, right? It gets down into like, what are your like CMS capabilities? How is it like? How is your website networked? What is the server architecture? It's just this one interrelated complex ecosystem that is just really, really interesting.
Yeah, Wirecutter. Even though we are somewhat of a smaller site, the back end stuff is, and it all started on WordPress, right? So it's like some guy 12 years ago started a kind of reviews blog on WordPress. and now it grew into, 150 million, $200 million company that, um, now has 200 and something employees. But the engineering team has done a really great job of kind of the CMS is still WordPress, but that is just CMS entry to a database, and we have a ton of different type of systems that pull in from our review side. Things like reviews and price checkers, making sure that like Amazon, when they change their price, we're updated our price on our sites, and building all these tools that some of them are kind of like plugins to WordPress, but other ones are just different layers that get pulled in and with different APIs, and they kind of API'd the whole system to be able to pull that type of all together. Uh, and it's great because I'm like in this like, wow, like I'm actually in these meetings and I'm learning. So like the in-house side thing's been great for me just to get a little more nerdy with stuff, and I have more time to pull in some of that analysis. So I really dug that. Um, I wanted to kind of finish up this section talking about something I hope to get to one day, and I think everyone hopes to get to one day, is Tech SEO Boost, the conference that you started. Um, it's been a tough year for conference businesses, no matter what your conference is about. What are some things well, one, what was it like to start a conference? And two, what is it like to, plan a conference these
Y-
days?
Yeah, yeah. Oh man,
Especially such a niche conference, right?
yeah,
It's like,
yeah, yeah. Let me first tell the Tech SEO Boost origin story because I like it. I was at SMX Advanced, absolutely plastered with Max Prin, and this was Max's idea. It was Max's idea to start Tech SEO Boost, and he's goes really drunk. Paul, let's start a conference. Taps John Mueller on the shoulder. John, speak at our conference. And then that's how I started. And then I was like, well, maybe we should. Then how do we actually start this conference, right? And I was like, well, we're both working at large agencies. Maybe we can have our agencies help out so we can learn how to do this thing,
yeah,
and without really thinking about the future. Maybe in retrospect, I would have done it completely independently and learned on the go. But um, we went through our agency. Catalyst was like, yeah, let's try it. And I think they had no idea what they were getting into. They thought like this would be like our one of our webinars, and it would be this like little like local event, and no one would come. I don't think they realized what the interest would actually be like. But they realize now, and
yeah,
that this was something. And then we were trying to Max and I were trying to figure it out between two competing agencies, and that ultimately didn't work, unfortunately. But um, yeah, that's how Tech SEO Boost started. And we
that's
had it
great.
our first year. The reception was incredible. We kept doing it. It was primarily me just curating speakers, people that I knew from the industry that I thought were doing really, really smart things. I was always trying to get people that weren't necessarily on the speaking circuit, trying to bring people in that were, the
Yeah,
maybe they were like brilliant technical SEOs, and they had their head down in code, but they weren't speaking. And I was like, come on, just come speak, right? And I think people were exposed to new things by me doing that, because you wouldn't have normally seen these people talk. Like I remember I got J.R. Oaks to talk, and he was like,
yeah,
I don't want to talk, like this is boring, like no one's gonna care. Hamlet Batista. Oh my God. I was like, come, Hamlet, do a talk about Python. And he's like, oh, Paul, no one wants to see me write code, right? Like, no one wants to hear about nitty gritty Python work. And I was like, come on, just do it. I think everyone's going to love it. And I convinced Hamlet, and like that blew up into like Hamlet's Python
hmm,
movement afterwards. And, rest in peace, Hamlet. But, thank you for doing that. I think that's been a wonderful contribution to the SEO community, and I've benefited. I've enjoyed it. It makes my conversations more engaging and exciting. So um, yeah, it's been wild. So the Tech SEO Boost is still operated by Catalyst. I'm an event chair even while I'm at Conde, so it's still in operation. We're going to do this digital event after taking a pause due to the pandemic, and then we'll get back to an in-person event once everyone's like vaccinated and safe. But yeah, I mean, it's been a wild ride. I'm so happy to see people care and want more of this, because it was, let's create a conference that I care
Yeah.
about, and it turns out other people care about it too.
No,
So
it's great.
it's been really humbling.
I always thought things like SMX Advanced or any of the so-called advanced conferences weren't advanced. Or not that they're more advanced than your standard SMXs, but I would go to them and I would feel that I wasn't getting as much value out of them after I hit a certain level. And the biggest opportunity was the after hours. It's like that's where you actually learned, like during the thing. So when you came up with Tech SEO Boost, it was like, oh, this is perfect because this is gonna do. And actually, after seeing it, because I watched it online, and after seeing it, I was like, this was everything. Like I don't, I it made it actually. We talk a lot about imposter syndrome. I don't think I had any until like I watched. I'm like, oh, like they're doing that. Like JR just built the internet, and it's like seeing stuff going on here. And like Hamlet, I got to meet Hamlet at Raleigh SEO meetup with, and like that whole crew in Raleigh is insane too. But like Hamlet's just like pulling up ML stuff on like JR's face and like saying all these different things. And I was like, wow, I was like, these guys, like, it totally interested me. I loved it. And I love to see how like this cool thing, such a, Python, machine learning, all the data analysis type of things, like is in a way becoming like even another arm of SEO. So we had Jackie Chu on a couple episodes ago, and her job was SEO intelligence is her title. And I'm just like, that seems like a totally different, like, it's like you have strategy, but like just the one thing I've always hated in SEO is the reporting aspect of it, because I always have to say, like, take this with a grain of salt. Every report, like, it's like, oh, Google only gives us 10% of the data, or SEMrush is pulling all their stuff from Russian hackers, and all the href is coming from Singapore, and who knows what's like. All their numbers are different, but they're all good. So there we go. Like that's how I have to pull stuff together. So being able to see things like velocities and have when you have so much data, especially being at a site like a large, all your Condé Nast, I'm sure, I don't know what numbers are, but I'm sure like Wired gets a shit ton of traffic, so being able to use automation and Python, machine learning, to be able to see trends that a human eye won't be able to see, I think is great. And those are some of the things that I've gathered from the Tech SEO Boost, right? Just like, wow, just knowing H1 tags is not good enough. Just knowing like how to build a website, and like, hey, I built 100 websites. So that's great. Yeah, well, that's not like, that's like a tech SEO. And now you have like this more advanced level. And I learned a lot of that in SEO Boost.
What was the thing that surprised you the most, or maybe the thing that most people don't know about setting up an SEO conference?
I mean, this thing that surprised me most, I had no idea that many people would be interested in it. Um, Surprising things about setting up a conference, it's not easy. Like there's a lot of things to think about, especially doing um, uh, curating speakers, especially, and like in terms of our like what we're planning on doing in terms of like diversity. If you're constantly balancing things, like, yes, I care about diversity and I want a diverse group of speakers, but I really want to talk about these really important topics, and maybe this speaker doesn't have expertise on that topic, but we really we care about all these things, and just being able to figure out that puzzle is really difficult. I would say programming's no easy feat, and I've had bumps along the way. We like the last Tech SEO Boost we ran, we had, uh, we did it in the middle of a snowstorm, and like people almost didn't show up, and it was almost a big. There's just like so many logistics and planning things that you wouldn't think about. Like it is like I had hoped that we would just like, hey, I'll get all my SEO friends to come, and like we'll talk on a stage, but it's not it's not at all that simple.
Mm-hmm.
The best and worst and best worst ideas happen when you're drunk.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how many years has Tech SEO Boost been going on?
I think this is year 4. Because I think last year was 3. Yeah.
And it all came from a drunk conversation at another conference. It was SMX, right?
It was SMX Advanced, I think. Yeah.
From a drunk after hours conversation, and now you've got one of the most well-known technical SEO conferences out there. That's crazy. So why don't we move into the last section, which is the Twitter questions. One of my favorite sections. Every week we've got 5-6 questions this week. So thank you to our audience for submitting questions. We asked a little bit late. We usually ask on Thursdays. We asked on Friday morning, and y'all came through. So we do appreciate that. This week, just like the last couple of weeks, with the exception of last week, the best question, as judged by Paul will be the judge, jury, and executioner, as all guests have been, will get a free Page 2 Podcast t-shirt. The one thing that we ask, it's not a requirement, we ask it nicely, and we have started to get this response a little bit, is that if you are the winner, please, when you get your merchandise, take a picture, tag us. We'd love to see it. It's pretty awesome to see people wearing the swag of a brand that you've personally created. So please just humor us. And if you're the winner, tag yourself in a picture. We would love to see it. All right, so question number 1 comes from Evan Sherbert. He is at JD Salinjerk, which I love that Twitter handle. On Twitter, I believe that's a Catcher in the Rye reference. So when did SEO first start to click for you? When did it feel intuitive? A project, job, experience? And I'm going to apologize. I feel like I totally buried the lead on that question earlier in the episode, but Paul, I'll let you answer or re-answer that.
Yeah. We totally talked about this a little bit, but yeah, I think just with my sort of web dev experience and like an interest in marketing, it was a perfect storm. I didn't know what SEO was, and once I really understood what like real SEO was, not like snake oil SEO was, like everything clicked. Like it was perfect.
All right. Question number 2 comes from season 2 guest Simon Cox. So Q for at Fido on the podcast. When determining a comprehensive technical SEO strategy, does Paul prefer D20 or D8? And I'm going to admit I have no clue what he's referring to. So this is Imposter Syndrome Live. I've got no idea what he's talking about.
What a jokester. Yeah, this is a Dungeons and Dragons reference.
Oh my God, that's why. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll have to say I play Dungeons and Dragons occasionally, but probably not as much as Simon thinks. I'm more of actually really passionate about board games, which are different than Dungeons and Dragons. I have actually a board game blog and podcast. So like I think that's what he's getting at. Yeah. Boardgamesquad.com, if anyone's curious. That's the home of both the blog and podcast. And although I did get to play Dungeons and Dragons my twins were very young, and we were doing a like sort of an SEO campaign where it was let's see, it was Alexis Sanders, Rob Ousby. It was, who else was there? I'm blanking. It was Red Hat. Jeff,
Jairus or JP?
Not Jairus. JP. It was JP.
Yeah.
And who? Oh my God, what's her face? I'm so sorry, Jamie. And yeah, and she made everything happen. So I can't believe I blanked on that. But that was tons of fun, and I think everyone just got busy, and we couldn't continue with it.
Speaking of board games, we got another board game related question. You may have already answered this. You violated the rules of Twitter questions without even knowing. But this question came from Micah Fisher Kirschner. at Micah FK on Twitter. When will you create a board game on SEO? Any hints about the area style?
Yeah, I answered him on Twitter, but yeah, I had started. I'm not making an SEO board game, although I totally thought about it and I was discussing it with some other people. I am trying to design a board game, and I've sort of taken a hiatus given what's going on with the pandemic, and it's big part of designing a board game is actually play testing it. Putting it together, playing it with a bunch of people, getting feedback, adjusting. And there's a lot of people that are designing board games online on something like Tabletop Simulator, but I just found it very cumbersome and difficult. But I am designing a board game that is, for those in the know, it is a hybrid area control and worker placement game with like a very dark theme. It's about people, souls in hell
Ooh.
that are sort of forced into combat with each other for no apparent reason other than that they are in hell.
Sounds like you're going back to that psychology degree, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez, and the religion. Good Lord.
Yeah.
Here I am thinking of like SEO monopoly. How great would it be to have a card that says, "Oh, you just disallowed your entire site via your robots file. Don't collect $200. Go straight to jail. Don't pass go." And then we get souls competing in eternal combat in
I
hell.
think SEO would make a good board game if you think about like pulling different like levers on like ranking factors.
Yeah,
I think it would be kind of neat. It's just like I don't know that the audience is there.
Matt Cut sends you to jail.
Yes.
Oh.
All right. So our next question, I think I already buried the lead on this one, so I'm ruining the entire Twitter section. But Jackie Chu, season 3 guest at Jackie C. Chu on Twitter. Can you talk about the founding of Tech SEO Boost, how you decided to take the leap, the challenges, and your current involvement and plans for it? It brought such a unique group of people together, and I hope it's a proud moment for you and will live on.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Jackie. Totally answered it, but you can go back and hear the story of when I was drunk with Max Prin and we tapped John Mueller on the shoulder and said, "Let's do a conference." Again, like I had the same thing that Jeff had, where I would go to like SMX Advanced and like I would feel like this wasn't advanced, and I just wanted to create a conference that I would get something out of. And I still, when I attended, like I don't know everything. Like people think like you get to a point where people think you're an expert, and because you're an expert, you know everything. But like I'm learning things every single day. I go to Tech SEO Boost and I pick out topics that I'm kind of like interested in, and by being interested in them, that usually means that I don't always know a lot about them. Sometimes I do, and I want to learn more. But I learn a lot from Tech SEO Boost myself, so I like attending.
When you guys tapped John Mueller, what did he say? That's maybe that's an
he
interesting
was not opposed. Like we didn't have him speak, but it was always every time he didn't speak, it was due to like a scheduling thing.
Yeah.
But I was impressed that it was not a no.
Yeah, I've always wondered. He seems like just such a really nice guy, and I've always wondered what he's like, kind of in a personal setting. So I was interested in what he might have said. All right. So question number 5 comes from former search discovery colleague of Jeff and I's, Zach Chahalis at Zach Chahalis on Twitter. How would you recommend that someone get into Python for use within SEO, and parentheses, data analysis, reporting, strategy development, etc., so on and so forth?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So one, I say when you learn to program for the purpose of SEO, you're making usually one or two decisions, right? You're making a decision of either do you really care mostly about like the web dev side of things, like how your sites are constructed, and in which case you should be focusing probably a little bit more on like JavaScript or something like that. That just makes a little bit more sense. But at the time where point where you've chosen Python, you care more about the data side of things usually. Not that either of those are mutually exclusive, but one is a little bit more appropriate for web development. One's a little bit more appropriate for data analysis. In terms of learning Python, it is in some ways very syntactically simple compared to other programming languages. It is an interpreted language. You have an interpreter, and it's doing a lot of things for you, so you don't have to worry about like memory and pointers and all stuff like that. So like it's a really good first programming language. It was not my first programming language. So in terms of what I think is a good resource for learning Python from scratch is jaded by the fact that it was not my first programming language. So in terms of resources that I think are good, Kaggle, which is it's an organization for actually solving machine learning programs. They have a really nice tutorial, in my opinion, and it's the basics of Python. And then it gets, all of a sudden you start doing like machine learning, and like before that, working with like pandas and other like data libraries. And I think it's pretty good. I'm also a big fan of Code Academy. I think that whole like interface of like doing interactive programming works, makes sense. They have a Python module. I don't know if it is data oriented. I think it's just like the basics of like Python, although I'm not sure. And I would recommend that. And then lastly, I'm a huge fan of lynda.com or whatever. It's LinkedIn Learning. I think it's the same website, but they have two different brands live at the same time. I don't know what they're doing. And the reason I'm a fan of that is they have coursework on everything imaginable, and a lot of major libraries give you free access to that. So like when I was in Boston, the Boston Public Library gave me access. I know the New York Public Library gives you access. And this is very common amongst public libraries. And for that reason, due to its accessibility, I think it's a really good option. If you already know Python, there is a really good book. I'm drawing a blank, that was written by, I think it was the creator of Pandas, that gets into like how to like really efficiently use Pandas, which is a very important library when you start working with anything that concerns itself with like tabular data in Python. And it's really good. I'll have to dig up that. It was actually, I think Hamlet told me about it, and I ended up like reading it, and I got tons of tips of things. Like I was already working in Pandas, and things I didn't know about already, things on like efficiency, and even in some cases like functions I just didn't know about that were really useful. So that's a really good book.
Excellent. Last question. So this question's from Darwin at DazFNYC, and I'm gonna just say this is, I think, based on his Twitter profile, man, I like what he did with this question, and you guys will see what I'm talking about. And this is a two-part question. So when you'd consider an SEO as a technical SEO, what are the minimum skills she would have?
Can you repeat that just one more time?
And so it's a little bit broken in terms of the syntax. But when you'd consider an SEO as a technical SEO skill, or I'm sorry, is a technical SEO, what are the minimum skills she would have? So I guess the question is, what are the minimum viable skills you need to be a technical SEO?
Yeah. Okay. So I think it was 2019. Everything's sort of jumbled in my head now with twins and pandemics, but I think it was 2019 that I spoke at MozCon, and the topic of that was redefining technical SEO. And I think the distinctions I made in that presentation have an impact on how I would answer this. So let me just give the brief rundown on that. So one, I think there is sort of this more like traditional, like what people think of as technical SEO. This is things that have to do with crawling and, now rendering and then indexing, ranking, right? Like the standard things people talk about when they talk about technical SEO. And it's, making sure that Google can see your website in an optimal manner, right? Then there is what I call checklist technical SEO, and these are things where you can sort of go down a checklist and be like, is there a canonical tag? Is that canonical tag referencing the right version of the page that you want it to? It's things that like a lot of crawlers will just spit out reports on, or that you can simply put a checklist. Doesn't require too much thought. The problems that it solves are different than what I was previously talking about, in that the sense that there is a skill gap that may be present. So like you may end up having to like rejigger a CMS in the first instance to make something work in an optimal fashion, and knowing how to look at that, look forward beyond what would be provided in a simple checklist is actually like a different skill set, right? You need a little bit more familiarity with like web infrastructure and architecture. Then there is what did it say? There was what I called like blurry lines technical SEO, and these are things that I think sort of aren't really technical SEO, but often end up within the purview of SEOs. This is like web performance optimization, right? Like in my opinion, like that's for like front end like web engineers, right? It's but because Google has done this thing, like it often falls to the SEO, and the SEOs are often the people advocating for web performance optimization. And like some people might say like you need that as a skill to be a technical SEO, but do you really? I don't know. And then lastly, there is what I call like I don't know what to call it. It is like this advanced technical SEO, which I think really encompasses things like data science, playing around with data, gaining insights that might affect the bottom line of everything else you're doing with SEO, like maybe doing an interesting data analysis that will affect like what content you're writing, or how to look at how Google is perceiving your website. It's just a little bit beyond what those other things are touching, may even fall into blurry areas sometimes as well, but the actual like operational tasks are different. So I think depending on what you're doing, the skills are a little bit different, right? So to do minimal technical SEO, to do that checklist technical SEO, I think you need to understand things like meta tags. You have to have a basic concept of like HTML. You have to know how to use certain tools like a screaming frog, and sort of like know what to look for there. To do the broader technical SEO that maybe is a little bit more complex, you need to understand aspects of web development, right? How websites are built, a little bit more than just HTML server, how servers work,
Yeah.
Back-end programming languages, because really there are sometimes these problems that aren't solved by running a crawler, right? To do the more advanced things, that's a programming skill. You should probably learn something like Python. And then the blurry lined areas, like I don't even know if you should learn that, right? Like should you? Yeah, you can learn about web performance. That's a web development skill, right? Learn JavaScript, learn front end web development. So yeah, I minimum effort. You need to know that checklist technical SEO. You need to learn how to use a crawler. But there's so many other paths you can take depending on what SEO is for you, what is needed by your business or organization that you're a part of, and where you want to go.
All right, so let's pick a winner. That was 6 amazing questions. So we've got Evan with when did first SEO start to click for you? We've got Simon with the D&D reference. We've got Micah with the board game question. Jackie with the Tech SEO Boost conference question, Zach with the Python question, and Darwin with the technical SEO minimum viable skills.
I'm gonna say this. Because we buried the lead in so many instances there, it's really hard for me to unbiased pick a winner. So let's do this. Let's use a random number generator to keep this fair. How many questions did we have?
We had 6.
Do you have them? Do you have them ordered?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I'm gonna Google a random number generator. Between 1 and 6, right? right, built into Google. You gotta love how Google steals
Yep.
traffic from everyone. 1.
That means
All right.
Evan wins the Page 2 podcast.
There you go.
There we go. At JD Salenjerk. Great Twitter handle. So Evan, we're going to be reaching out to you to get your Page 2 podcast t-shirt in the mail. When you get it, of course, tag us and show off the swag. So yeah, Jeff, take us home.
Yeah, we like to ask one final question of all our guests, and that is, what words of advice would you give to a person just getting into SEO?
Just go for it. Try something out. If it doesn't work, try something else. Just go for it. There's something to be said about doing and being someone who doesn't doing, someone who just like, I need to infinitely keep learning, and then eventually once I learn everything, maybe I'll start doing it. And what ends up happening is you don't do anything. So just go for it.
Awesome.
Great advice, Paul. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my personal SEO blog is searchwilderness.com. My board game blog is boardgamesquad.com. My SEO Twitter handle is Fighto, Fighto.
Cool. Well, Paul, I consider this a very successful episode. If for nothing else, that your twins did not crash through the door right in the middle of the episode. I was waiting for that to happen at any point, and it didn't. So we made it all the way through. We were even just a little bit over time because Jeff always talks too much.
Yep.
No, I'm joking. Jeff barely talks. It's usually me talking too much. So we definitely appreciate you coming on our show. Great show as always. And yeah, we record on Fridays, so we're heading into the weekend. If you're listening to this episode, it should be Monday or Tuesday. So enjoy your week. Have another great week, and we will be back next week with another amazing episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me.